Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Now the first story of the day is an interesting one because it's actually about two stories that I don't want to cover because I think that they're probably false. And it's part of a larger discussion as to whether or not we can continue to really even humor the stories coming out of Latino Review. Because I think after this whole Spider-Man debacle, they've proven that, as some of you have even pointed out with the Tom Holland announcement, that they're just like throwing darts in the dark, you know, and I think they're betting on the fact that they'll be right sometimes, right? And I understand that in today's entertainment media culture, everybody sometimes jumps the gun. Like look at Vanity Fair on Monday or so with the Ava DuVernay story directing Black Panther, right? They were like, oh, it's a done deal, and then they had to kind of retract it. And, you know, it slinked away. You know, nobody made a big deal about the mistaken announcement because I think every media outlet is worried that it could happen to them and they don't want any bad karma coming their way eventually. But Latino Review, I think, is, you know, I think malicious. You know, the other things are like, oh, the other reporters I feel are like, oh, we genuinely made a mistake. We felt that was the story. But I feel like Latino Review is covering these stories and putting out these ideas just to like feed the beast, just to get clicks, and also I think to keep their name in the news, because whenever anybody reports on these rumors, they have to say where they come from, you know, not only because to give credit where credit is due, but kind of like an insurance policy, right? Like, this isn't our rumor, this is Latino Review's rumor. So I think that in the beginning I was picking up their stories because people were talking about them. But I think that now, you know, it's really useless to talk about something that probably isn't going to work. So what are the two big stories? Because a number of people asked me why I wasn't discussing these, so I wanted to clarify today. But the two biggest stories they've put out there recently, you know, like for instance, although another one is that they wagered that Old Man Logan would be the next Wolverine movie, and I think that's a sensible guess because it's Hugh Jackman's last Wolverine film. You know, it would play into some of his concerns with still becoming the character at this point physically. They'd be like, you could be a little off your game because you're playing Old Man Logan. And also, I think it's one of the most famous Wolverine stories left, and he'd certainly want to cover it before he's done, right? Why leave anything on the table for the next Wolverine? Get your own stories. So I think that's an educated guess, but probably a guess nonetheless. But these next two stories, I think, again, are like just guesses, right? And I even saw one website have to retract or update one of their coverage of one of these, you know, rumors, because they said, oh, you know, we looked at Ben Affleck's schedule, and he really doesn't have the time to make a Batman movie for 2018. Like, that's one of the stories that was out there floating around yesterday, that, ooh, Chris Terrio's writing a Batman standalone movie, and Ben Affleck's going to direct it. It's going to be called The Batman. It's going to come out in 2018. Now, do I think that maybe Ben Affleck is working on a Batman movie? Sure I do. I think that's probably one of the reasons he agreed to be Batman. Is Chris Terrio going to write it? Wouldn't be surprised. Ben Affleck put him on the project on Batman v Superman to help rewrite it, and let's just call him Batman. No, or Bruce Wayne. No, he's Ben Affleck's guy from Argo, so he's already Team Affleck. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's in the works, but, you know, I don't know at what point it's coming down the pipeline. And, you know, as people are saying, 2018 seems unrealistic because Ben Affleck doesn't want to put all of his eggs in the bat basket. He wants to, you know, still continue to make, you know, important films in the vein of what got him this resurgence in his career in the first place, right? He's a little bit like a Matthew McConaughey, and I think he doesn't want to have, like, his Lincoln commercial, right? He doesn't want Batman to be his Lincoln commercial. He needs to make sure that he maintains his forward momentum. So he has other projects that are in the works that he's very eager to work on that have already been delayed because of his involvement in these Batman movies. And he's popping up in Suicide Squad, so I think that for the time being, it's more likely that Ben Affleck is going to go and do cameos in other DC films to keep the character in the forefront. I mean, he's Batman. As soon as he shows up, everyone's going to be like, ooh, Batman! And then maybe later on down the line do a solo Batman movie. Although, you know, we'll see. I'm sure Ben Affleck is waiting to see how he is received as the character as well, right? He's not going to throw more time after, you know, wasted time if that was how it turns out to be the case. I don't think it will, but I wouldn't make any plans for a solo Batman movie until I saw what the reviews and the audience reaction were to my first foray as Batman. Now, the other rumor is that X-Men and Fantastic Four are going to have a crossover movie, right? And we've known this for some time, that they're really eager over at Fox to do this. They want to create their own Marvel, their own competing MCU, which I think would annoy Marvel to no end. They'd be like, oh, there's like an alternate universe. It's like Battleworld, right? And you're like, although I have to say I'm reading Battleworld, and while some of the stories are good, I'm like, why am I reading this again? It's almost like the New 52, which, you know, obviously now is going away. You know, you're like, we just took this detour for nothing, you know? And like Age of Apocalypse was, I think, still to this day one of the best crossovers of all time in terms of an alternate dimension. But, you know, there was just one alternate dimension, and they took like a year to do it correctly. You know, Battleworld is like what, like 30 alternate dimensions, and you're just like, okay, I guess that was fun. It's like a little bit more like Marvel's Twilight Zone. But anyway, I think definitely, of course, they want to do an X-Men and Fantastic Four franchise, but I think it's a little bit premature to plan that. I mean, who knows? Maybe all of these things will come true at Comic-Con, right? And Latino Review will have, you know, gambled and won. But I think that they don't know how Fantastic Four is going to be received, so I think it's too early to move forward on that end. And then as far as the X-Men go, not only is Hugh Jackman leaving, Jennifer Lawrence is leaving, Bryan Singer is supposedly leaving after X-Men Apocalypse. They've got too many people, you know, too many things in flux even with their X-Men titles. So they have to nail that down first, and then I think they can maybe do a crossover. And also there's Deadpool. I mean, if anyone should be in the crossover, it should be Deadpool because his character perfectly suits that kind of meta commentary, right? I think that Fox is doing very well with their Marvel properties, but I don't quite think the foundation is strong enough yet to support crossovers. All right, so that's the first non-story of the day, and I'm curious to how you guys feel, right? I mean, like, I just feel it's not responsible for me to report on these stories. So going forward, if you see a story reported by Latino Review, unless it just becomes so big that it's like front page news, but this just like spewing out of like, you know, headlines to try and see what sticks, I just don't think it's worth either of our time, right? Okay, so the second story of the day is a true story because it comes from Variety. It's an exclusive, and it's that Ezra Miller is in final talks to join Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. What a crazy zany cast, right? You've got Eddie Redmayne and Ezra Miller. I mean, we all might just die from adorableness. But anyway, it's really particularly interesting that Ezra Miller, well, there are some other castings. I guess we'll talk about that first. So I do think that Ezra Miller is an interesting choice to go into this movie alongside with Catherine Watterson, because you're starting to get a distinct feel for what the American witches are like, right? They're basically kind of like hippies, it seems. Which is weird to me because the book takes place in the 1920s, right? So I'm getting a 1970s vibe from the cast. Maybe like, you know, the 70s were actually the age of the witch. But, it's, you know, I guess you could see them as witches too. I don't know. Ezra Miller is just so fantastic. I'm excited to see him do anything. Like, he's one of those people where they're like, I could watch that person read the phone book. And I'm like, Ezra Miller is one of those people. And thank goodness, I'm so glad his career has come around. But we'll talk about that in just a moment. But then also, someone named Alison Sudol is apparently up for the other female lead. She's on like this new upcoming TV show called Dig. It might have already started to air. She was in Transparent as the girlfriend of, I think, one of Jeffrey Tambor's sons. But she hasn't done a lot of acting. She's also a singer, though, so a real unknown. So a very interesting choice by David Heyman and David Yates. But then also for the rival of Eddie Redmayne's character, Newt Scamander, they're considering Josh Gad, on fire! And then also Michael Cera. I think those are two not great choices. I think that Josh Gad is firmly in the Disney camp. I mean, also he's playing LeFou. He's in Pixels. You know, he's Olaf. I think Josh Gad has a very certain persona that's developing, and I think he's just too much a Disney guy, right? And I think the teams, it's so funny. Hollywood worked so hard to get rid of the studio system, but I think we're slowly seeing it start to come back in a new form, but a kind of studio system nonetheless. And that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. And then as far as Michael Cera goes, you know, I just don't know if he can come back. You know, I just don't know if he can. I think also because Jesse Eisenberg is so popular right now, and he's, you know, Batman. He's Lex Luthor in Batman v Superman. I think the Michael Cera ship just might have sailed, and I don't know if there's any bringing it back. We'll see. But very interesting vibe for the rival, right? We'll see. All right. So anyway. Let's move on here to what I wanted to. I don't want to. Why did I pause? Well, you know, both obviously those actors are both, you know, have a Jewish persona to their comedy, and I would hate for the villain to be like this overtly Jewish-styled character, right? I mean, Come on, J.K. Rowling's Wizarding World. Don't go anti-Semitic on us. All right, so, but hopefully that won't be the case. All right, so anyway, I'm sure that's such a slim chance, but they should be very careful of it over at Warner Brothers. I would be very, 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 very careful about that. All right, so anyway, what I wanted to talk about the studio system. Well, you might also recall, of course, Ezra Miller is playing a little character named the Flash. And that's a Warner Brothers picture, right? So I think that Warner Brothers is like, okay, Ezra Miller is now officially on our team. Let's build up his career so he is an asset for the studio. What can we do? Put him in some of our other franchises. You're seeing that with Josh Gad over at Disney, going over to live-action fairy tales with Beauty and the Beast. Ben Affleck is very much Team Warner Brothers. For instance, Adam Sandler for a long time was Team Sony. So was Will Smith. Sony has a little bit of a bad team at the moment. But still, you're seeing loyalties to certain studios by certain actors and directors even. You know, also sometimes to production companies. Like Nolan is a big, he has a big in with Legendary. But you know, Johnny Depp is very loyal to Disney, etc., etc. So I just think it's funny that, you know, that's probably why Ezra Miller has gotten this role. Because not only does Warner Brothers want just him to succeed because, you know, they think he's a great talent, they want to give him work, but also it's an investment in the Flash movie, right? They're like, the Flash movie doesn't come out for a really long time. How are we going to make sure this guy stays in the spotlight? Well, why don't we put him in this other big movie that's going to start shooting very soon? So it's very clever, it's very businessy, and I think Ezra Miller, and it's interesting to see Ezra Miller benefit from business relationships like this, considering just, you know, how much of like a maverick and outsider he was at the beginning of his career, right? But you know what? I think that you can maintain that aspect to your craft while playing the Hollywood game. And this is very much playing the Hollywood game. So good for him. And I think Ezra Miller will be an excellent investment for Warner Brothers. And I also think he'll do a wonderful job publicizing the film that he's in. He's very personable. And I think that Warner Brothers will find that they made a good choice with him, not only creatively, but in someone to stump for the studio. Now, the third story of the day is very encouraging. I've actually been holding on to this for a few days. I haven't been able to find a spot for it, but I did today. And that's that they're making this comedy at Universal called an Untitled Girls Trip project, and it comes from some of the top names in quote unquote black film. But what that makes, we'll talk about the talent involved in just a minute. But what's particularly exciting about that is it looks like we have a vehicle primarily for actresses of color. And that's very exciting because it's very hard to find any opportunities for actresses of color. Chris Rock, of course, recently commented on that, saying that you can go to the movie like every weekend, twice even, for months and not see a black woman or just any woman of color in a substantial role of any note. And I think that's really telling. In fact, I was actually just going through the release schedule. I was having a conversation with someone the other day about, my favorite actors. And so I was like, I know, to jog my memory, I'll go through the upcoming release schedule and decide which movies I'm going to for the actors, right? Well, I was able to come up with a bunch of male names, but I was like, oh man, I need to get some actresses on this list. And I've discovered that there are very few movies coming up for the rest of the year. I mean, we kind of already had our big female push, but post Trainwreck with Amy Schumer coming up, there's like really no movie except for The Hunger Games with a female actress in the lead role who's the driving force of that. And I guess also Jennifer Lawrence's Joy later this year as well. So I was like, that's disturbing. So as bad as it is, though, for white women, it's even worse for women of color. So that Universal's moving forward with this, I think, is very exciting. There is that film Lila and Eve with Viola Davis and Jennifer Lawrence, but, you know, that's like a really small release, not getting a lot of attention. This seems like a big push. Now, of course, there were a lot of female characters in the comedies that have been made lately with Kevin Hart, for instance, like About Last Night, the Best Man movies, and then also, I think those are the two. But I think that, oh no, there was something else too. I don't remember what it was, but there have been a couple, obviously, that we all know about. But the female characters, I think, in those movies were secondary to the guy characters, right? They certainly weren't as big names, etc., etc. So I think this is very exciting, and I'm very pleased with the talent involved. And, now, someone else's star who's rising is Kenya Barris. He's the creator and writer of Blackish on ABC. Love that show. Please watch Blackish. It's very good. It's getting a little bit trounced by Empire because they're on at the same time, and many people feel that that's unfortunate to pit like the only two shows with black audiences against each other, right? It's like, can't they be on at different nights? Wednesday night is the only time that black people might want to watch TV. Although, to be fair, Shonda Rhimes' Thursday night lineup does very, very well. So Thursday's kind of like taken care of. But, ideally, these shows should reach a broader audience. And I don't watch Empire, but I do watch Blackish, and I think it's just fantastic. It's often, that and the Goldbergs are often the best shows of Wednesday night, beating out, in my opinion, Modern Family. But anyway, so Kenya Barris, I guess because of that show, is doing very well in Hollywood overall. We discussed, is writing the Good Times movie, and now is going to co-write this Untitled Girls Trip project. And he's working on it with Tracy Oliver, a black female writer, and they worked together before because they wrote Barbershop 3, which is currently being made and directed by Malcolm D. Lee, who of course does the Best Man movies. And producing all of these is Will Packer, who is very prolific in the quote-unquote black film. I want to come up with a better name for it, but we're talking about films that I think, and to Will Packer's credit, I think he's trying to reach beyond, the obvious target demographic for these projects. And I've seen most of Will Packer's recent movies. No Good Deed. I think he does a really good job, and I think he has not only great roles in front of him behind the camera for black talent, but just makes good movies that anyone would enjoy. But I think this is very exciting and very promising. I'm curious how you guys feel about it. But then also on the flip side, what do you think of this talent continuing to only make movies largely just or assumed to cater to one demographic, right? Do you think they should be making a little bit more of a push to reach out to that broader audience, right? We talked about that just earlier this week with Black Panther. But lots of talented individuals here. I think the bottom line is it's so great to see them getting more work, and I'm excited to see who they'll cast as the female leads. I mean, there are some definite, established names. I'd love to see Tracy Ross. I think it's Tracy Ellis Ross from Blackish, the mom, who's Diana Ross's daughter, be one of the actresses in the movie. She's so funny. Maybe some new talent will be able to be discovered as well. Now, as for the viewer question, this comes from 882D-Man. And 882D-Man says, Grace, I'm a longtime viewer, and I love your in-depth analysis of the movie and comic book industry. P.S. You're the reason I started reading comic books. Awesome! I'm so glad. Comic books are a wonderful, wonderful medium. So, 882D-Man continues saying, so thank you, smiley face. Question, what happened to the Narnia franchise? I hear they're working on a fourth movie, but the franchise is a hop from studio to studio. The first movie started off so strong. What went wrong? And what will you do to fix it? Love the show. Smiley faces. 4 smiley faces. Well, that's true, so let me catch everybody else up. Now, obviously, the first Chronicles of Narnia was a huge hit. It helped Tilda Swinton's career, and it also helped James McAvoy's career. As you might recall, that was one of his first big roles. And that made $745 million worldwide. But then, the next 2 movies only made about $400 million worldwide, so they were seriously depreciated in terms of box office. So that was a problem. Then, Walden Media assumed, don't never assume. You know what the saying is with assume? When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me, because that's the letters in the word. I learned that in school, and it really stuck with me, because who would teach that to a child? But it stuck. But anyway, they assumed that when their contract in 2011 ran out with the C.S. Lewis estate, that it would be renewed. Well, they assumed wrong. And the C.S. Lewis estate has moved the franchise now over to the Mark Gordon Company, which, hasn't really done anything too notable either. Odd choice, personally, I feel. And they are indeed working on a 4th entry called The Silver Chair. They've been working on the script since December 2013, and it's going to focus on another witch this time, the Lady of the Green Kirtle, aka the Emerald Witch, and you might recall that Tilda Swinton played the White Witch in the first few films. And they actually had a contest online to name this character, to give her an actual name, and they would use that in the script. But the contest is over, and they didn't announce what the name is. And so they're apparently still putting this film together. What do I think went wrong? Well, I think that Tilda Swinton was clearly the magic of the first movie, and also to some degree James McAvoy. But those people didn't really stay with the film. And then they brought Ben Barnes in thinking, oh, he's going to fix it, and he didn't fix it. Also, I don't know about you, but I didn't even see The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, by the way, because I thought the Prince Caspian was so poorly done. And I don't know if you recall my thoughts on Prince Caspian, but I'll reiterate them here. And I was actually pretty upset at how poor these children were in terms of how they treated Narnia and its people, right? I was like, you are the worst battle leaders of all time. They basically, if you might recall, created a situation where these kids went from London to Narnia. We're like, I'll lead your army. I'll lead you in rebellion. And then did such a poor job leading the troops, they basically like led all these majestic creatures to their deaths. And then they were like, oh, that really sucks. Let's go home. Let's go back to England. It's like if Wendy and the other Darling children went to Neverland, said, hey, let's fight Hook. Let's not take it anymore. And then did a poor job leading the Lost Boys into battle and got them all killed. And then we're like, Tinkerbell, I'd like to go home now. And then just left a blood-soaked Neverland behind them. That's kind of what happened in Prince Caspian. So I think that was not good. And then also, I think that in the press, the religious aspects of C.S. Lewis novels really took over. And so I think they got branded to some degree like religious films, right? But not like in a particularly positive manner. So I think people are starting to be like, oh yeah, those are those not very good, overly expensive religious movies that don't have Tilda Swinton in them anymore. No thanks. Obviously Ben Barnes has never really caught on either. I mean, last I saw him, he was in the recent History Channel special. And he was okay, but, you weren't like, why did this guy ever leave movies? You were like, I don't even know if you're good enough for TV, Ben Barnes, but at least you're not embarrassing yourself. So I think poor casting, a bad image in the media, slippage of quality, and the loss of Tilda Swinton. So clearly, as you can see, I think the Mark Gordon Company is aware of that, and they're like, we need a new witch. However, when you have the Emerald Witch, you start to have witch sisters, then you're starting to get very close to Oz, right? It's very hard. All these fantasy stories like overlap a little bit, so you have to be really careful to make sure you're like, this is what mine is, right? So I would be like, C.S. Lewis, do you mind to state if we take some liberties and just kind of write a Tilda Swinton movie? I think that's what people really want to see. And then she's like, I'm sorry, I'm shooting Doctor Strange. And they're like, okay, after that, we reserve you. So I think that's what happened with the series. Because the first one was an amazing movie. But I think that Prince Caspian, and I don't know, whoever watched Dawn Treader, did it get back on track? But I think that it lost its mojo, it lost its driving force, and as I said, those other elements. So I'm curious to what you guys think. And again, as I would fix it, I don't know if it can be fixed. I think maybe this is something that has to sleep for a while and then be rebooted. And then also I think other films didn't help it, like The Golden Compass, right? The Golden Compass was horrible. I don't know if I've ever told you the story. This is how we'll end today's episode. I went to see The Golden Compass and I was super bored. I was like, man, this movie is so boring. I can't believe this movie actually got made. And I was like, you know what? I have to go to the bathroom. I don't care if I miss some of the movie. So I walked out of the theater, and I was in one of those really big stacked theaters, where like they have stadium seating, and like the screen was really bright at the moment that I was leaving. So I turned and I looked, and I was like, oh, this is a very full theater. And I just wanted to see the audience. For some reason, I just looked at the audience. And when I did, I noticed that everyone that I could see in the entire theater, and it was pretty sold out, like I don't know if sold out, but like really full showing, was asleep. It was hilarious. It really stuck with me to this day, because I've never seen that, where a movie pretty much put the entire audience to sleep. Like really, everyone I could see, at least in the first couple of rows, was asleep, which was absolutely hysterical. So I think that didn't help this either, because it was very similar. I think people just kind of put them all in the same category. And they're like, I'm done with those, boy. So that's an instance where other franchises or movies try and rip you off, but then are bad and then end up hurting you. Alright, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you, 88 Dude D-Man, 2D-Man. I hope I was able to shed some light on your question. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question. Anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching.